South African students who were forced to flee universities in Ukraine are back home. Many are medical students who were studying in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro and other cities in Ukraine. They're now hoping to complete their studies at South African institutions. On the 10th of March, representatives of the students and several university medical deans and vice-chancellors attended an online meeting to hear about the students' ordeal and find ways to help the students complete their degrees. The meeting was also attended by the University of South Africa, or rather University South Africa. And Professor Ahmed Bawa, the CEO of University South Africa, joins us now live to tell us more. Thank you very much, Prof, for your time here on All Angles. Now, firstly, can the universities get these students in now, or will they have to wait until next year?
Thank you so much for having us on the program. And I think that's a very complicated question. We don't have an answer to that yet. And of course, the reason is that it's such an unusual situation, that we have students coming back from their studies overseas. And of course, there's a whole range of issues related to that. I mean, just how do we confirm what qualifications the students have received there? What parts of their curriculum have they completed? Does that curriculum match what is going on at our universities? And of course, the really big issue, especially for the medical students, is that there are so many South African students who have qualified for entry into the medical school, but for whom there isn't enough place. So there are all these complex issues. And I think that what we have to do now is really just collect all the information that's available. We've been presented now with a list of students and what they've been studying. And for the medical school deans to now sit down and try and understand what can be done. There isn't an easy route into this. I think it's going to be a very complex path, but one that I think we'll try to assess and to address. I think that we must accept that these students have been through a really traumatic period, and that the universities will try to do whatever they can. But it isn't going to be easy.
Now, South African universities have got a certain criteria that already kicked them off in the first place. So how they qualify now?
That's a good question, and I think it's a question that we have to grapple with. So I think that for those students who are very close to completion, of their medical degrees wherever they are studying in the past, we're talking about Ukraine here, that it might be somewhat easier for those students than for students who are just entering the program of studies in other parts of the world. And, for the reasons that you mentioned and I mentioned earlier. So I think we're just going to need some time, I think, to work out how best to manage the situation.
Well, some of these students are a few months away from graduating. So how will these developments affect them?
Well, I think that we have to accept that, that as I mentioned, that we'll have to find ways of addressing that particular challenge. First of all, I mean, I think, the universities, our universities, will want to understand just what those students have completed and how that matches what is required in the South African system for registration to be a health professional, if you like. So it's much too early to tell at the moment exactly how this will play out.
So most of these students are studying medicine. So how different is our curriculum and our standards from the ones in Ukraine?
Yeah, we don't know, unfortunately. That's something that we have to work out. And I think that, it will have to be a partnership between the universities and the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, which registers health professionals. It will have to be a partnership between those two that comes to some conclusion about how to manage this. South African medical programs are accredited by the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, which then has some oversight, if you like, over the professional competence of our graduates. Now, of course, that's not the case with these students. You know, the Health Professionals Council of South Africa doesn't have any responsibility for oversight of Ukrainian programs. So, you know, that's the challenge I think that we have to face.
So who will the universities take first? Who will be prioritized?
I don't know. I think that we'll have to look at students on a case-by-case basis. I think that's the way that we're going to have to look at it. And I think that we have to leave it now to the medical school deans to work out, you know, just what can be done. What I'm aware of is that the South African Committee of Medical School Deans is meeting and they are discussing this. And I think, you know, we have to give them some time to come up with some proposals, if you like.
So we've been told many times that universities are full beyond capacity and that they couldn't admit some of the local students who qualified to get in. So how do you justify then accommodating these students that clearly can afford studying like in European countries?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. And it's a question I think that many parents and students will ask, you know, how is it that students have been admitted? And that's why I say that I think for those students who just started their programs in Ukraine, it will be very difficult, in my view, for them to be accommodated. But for those students who are just completing their studies in the Ukraine, you know, there might be a possibility of us kind of finding ways of getting them to complete those qualifications. There still remain some very key questions. I mean, for example, you know, which university will graduate those students? Is it the Ukrainian university? Or is it the South African university? It can't be the South African university because we have a rule, you know, that 50% of the qualification has to be completed at a university in South Africa for the student to graduate there. So there'll have to be some communication with the Ukrainian universities, if that is possible, about how to manage the situation.
And the funds, for instance, if a student is probably in Ukraine, you know, with a bursary, and then they suddenly have to finish off their studies at UCT or WITS, you know, for instance, does their, you know, how do we work out their bursaries now paying our universities, our local universities? How will that work?
You know, I think that's a critical question. I mean, to be honest, I don't have an answer to that. You know, it's very unlikely, of course, that these students will qualify for the National Students Financial Aid Scheme because they're studying overseas, which means that they have resources to study overseas. I suspect, I think the first hurdle really is for us to understand whether the universities can accommodate them or not. I think that's the first question. And then, you know, we can start talking about money issues after that, I think.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Professor Ahmed Bawa, the CEO of the Universities of South Africa.